So without further ado, Kathleen Gallagher and Jim Nelson will be presenting the forum this morning.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jim Nelson. I'm the business editor for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and I'm joined by my former colleague in the business news department, Kathleen Gallagher, Pulitzer Prize winner for the Journal Sentinel in 2011. And Kathleen, for more than 20 years, was a business reporter with the paper, and Kathleen has now gone on to work for the Five Lakes Institute. Do I have that right? Yeah. Sometimes I get the name of the organization wrong, right and wrong. And Kathleen can explain what she's doing in her new role. But for us, one of the things that she's been doing for the past year is she's writing a monthly column, and she's writing in my opinion, one of the most important things that we're doing at the paper is providing her insights on business, politics, and entrepreneurs and what's going on with our regional economy with her perspective and her opinion, both as a journalist, but now as an outsider within the business community. And this is a really valuable thing, especially when it comes to discussing the Foxconn project. So Kathleen, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do with Five Lakes and what you're trying to do with your column, and then we'll talk about Foxconn.
Hi, everybody. Great to meet you. I left the paper years ago and became executive director of Five Lakes Institute. It was formed by John Burns, who ran the private equity group at M&I Bank, and he spun it out into Mason Wells, which has been a very successful Milwaukee-based, Midwest-focused private equity firm. One of the reasons John started the institute was to fix all the things that that irritated him during his career as a private equity manager. And what he saw over and over again in the Midwest was, and he's probably visited every major manufacturing plant in the Midwest, what he saw over and over again was technology that was sitting on the shelf and not being commercialized. And it would have eventually, one way or another, be commercialized on the coast. So I'll give you an example. Why wasn't the Nest thermostat, this is a column I want to write, Jim, why wasn't the Nest thermostat, why didn't it happen here? Johnson Controls, Emerson Electric, Honeywell, all of them are in that business. And, there are complicated reasons for it, but the short answer is because we don't commercialize the way the West Coast does, and we don't throw the money at marketing the way the venture capitalists on the West Coast do. And by the way, guess who created the Nest? It was a guy who went to University of Michigan. So that's what Five Lakes Institute is out to fix through programming, and this column is a great forum for me to pick at some of that stuff. And there's nothing more fun to pick at than Foxconn.
So what I would like to do, what I think might be helpful, is to just sort of remind our audience, what is this Foxconn project? And at the paper, I'm one of our federally licensed drone pilots. And over the years, I've probably flown with my colleague, Mike DeSisti, one of our photojournalists. I've probably flown over the Foxconn property, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 times. And so what I'd like to show is just a couple of headlines about the project to remind ourselves what this thing is all about, and to give you, if you haven't been there and you haven't seen the size and scope of this part of our state, it's a huge area. So I'm going to share my screen here, and let's just take a quick look at a couple of headlines. So if you remember, in 2017, this is obviously one of many stories that we did, but remember the context of this. This is in 2017. Trump has been president for about a year and a half, and Scott Walker is starting to gear up to run for re-election. You have to understand the political context of what happened when this big announcement was made. So July of 2017, Foxconn, best known to most people as a Taiwanese company with huge factories in China that makes iPhones. And this is a high-tech company that that actually had a considerable amount of controversy in China about the way they were running their iPhone factories. But here they're announcing they're coming to Wisconsin, and they're going to spend 10 billion with a B dollars and create 13,000 jobs. What the heck? I mean, that's mind-blowing, just as much, just the facts alone. And if you recall, of course, President Trump and this is Terry Goh, who was chairman of Foxconn, Senator Johnson, and of course Governor Walker, they made a huge deal about this announcement, and they were promised that initially that they were going to make giant LCD displays. When they did a job recruiting fair at Marquette, I saw what they said they were going to be making. These aren't like your big screen TVs. These are like displays that you would see at the airport or in a surgical type environment where there's a very, very huge display for many, many people to see at great detail. This was what they originally promised they were going to make. And as we all know, in return for this promise and this investment, the state legislature and the Racine County and the Village of Mount Pleasant all made huge commitments of public assistance to Foxconn. The state commitment alone was if they went through and they spent $10 billion and created 13,000 jobs, the state was going to give them up to $3 billion in tax credits. And just so you understand, the tax credits, it's not just a little promise. It's not an accounting thing. It's cash. It was cash to the company, and this was the largest single incentive package ever offered by a unit of government in the United States. Just to understand the scope of this project, here's just a little drone flight that we did. This is midway through construction, so I believe this was shot in 2019. Think about for a second the size of this site. It's 4 square miles. All of this was farmland, and all of this was farmland that the owners, hundreds of families, were ordered to evacuate. The thing you see here in the foreground is, I'll probably show you another photo. That is now a giant dome. This building here that we're flying over is an assembly facility.
And Jim, that was 94 in the background, right? Highway
Correct.
94. Yeah,
Correct.
I-94.
In the far background. So we're pulling back toward the east. 94 is ahead of us. The dome thing is actually kind of interesting because it the point of the dome was not part of the original project. So the point of the dome was sorry, there's today's headlines. You can see the dome here in the background. The dome never had anything to do with making big screen display panels. And I'll get to that in a second. But so fast forward, President Trump did the groundbreaking. Walker goes to the groundbreaking. Trump calls this facility one of the 8th wonders of the world or something like that. Makes a huge deal about it. And then Foxconn hits the pause button and says, well, the market has changed for these big screen display panels. And we knew all along, and it was reported, they were not gearing up to do that anyway, because those display panels have to have a companion factory to make the glass. And that factory was never in the drawing, it was never there. So we knew, because the people who are in that line of business explained to us, and we explained to our readers, actually they can't make those big display panels because logistically that isn't what they're building there. The question is, and the question remains, what are they doing there? What are they doing there? And the answer is nobody knows. And what happened in about 2019, they announced, well, we're going to make smaller panels. We're going to make smaller display things like for phones or for an iPad or for, the tablets, the Surface tablets that you see people using. And they thought that's what they said they were going to do. Or we're still going to make our hiring goals, and we're still going to have 13,000 people and spend $3 billion. Please give us some money. And the reports that they issued to the state, every year they have to tell the state and document how many employees they have there so that they can get the tax credits. And the most they've had down there, according to the most recent reports of the state, it's been like 500 or 600 people. And then it appears as though what they're doing is they're hiring these people and then having them on the payroll, telling the state, okay, here's what these people do. And then those people go away. It's never been shown that these people are actually really working there. Foxconn has announced that they announced early in the pandemic, we're going to assemble ventilators. There's no evidence that that's ever happened. We're going to make masks. There was no evidence that that ever happened. They never showed us a single ventilator or a single mask or let us inside or any other journalists inside to show us what's going on there. There's 3 buildings. The one that you saw, which is the manufacturing facility, about 1 million square feet. It's huge. There's another one that's an assembly or a storage facility that's being used to store, I don't know. And then there's that dome. And it's been reported that Foxconn has said that that dome is going to be for the internet servers or something.
For a data center.
A data center.
And I've seen plans where, to have a data center, you need a lot of servers. I've seen plans where there are low-lying buildings around the dome that contain servers. It doesn't look like those buildings are ever going to be built. So essentially what that dome is an event space.
Well, and what it really appeared to us was that dome was, at least at one point, going to be the backdrop for a visit from Trump during 2020. There was a lot of, I think there was a visit in the works, and then they realized the optics of it weren't going to be good.
I went to a presentation they did where they were talking about, it seemed clear that what they were trying to do and use that dome as the house for it, home for it, was to do it like an IoT, artificial intelligence, lighthouse manufacturing consulting business. And you got the sense that dome was going to be where they brought people in to train them about lighthouse manufacturing, which they aren't doing here, but they do have a lighthouse facility in Asia.
So where we're at now is Trump's gone, Evers is gone, the CEO of the company, Terry Goh, the founder of the company, he's gone. So what we have here is 4 square miles largely undeveloped. It's been all flattened and it's been graded and so forth. And instead of a $3 billion investment, the company says it has invested about $900 million. So maybe a tenth of what they initially said they were going to do.
Well, and that investment, that 900 million, we think includes some buildings they've bought around the state that they say are going to be innovation centers, and salaries that, you know, they've paid. And so it's a pretty, there's a lot in that number.
Actually, what Kathleen just mentioned around the state thing it's a very important point, because they opened the offices in Racine, Green Bay. Was it Wausau? I know it was Eau Claire.
I think it was La Crosse.
No, it was Eau Claire. Eau
Eau Claire.
Claire and Madison. To our knowledge, and downtown Milwaukee. To our knowledge, nothing has gone on in those offices.
They also promised, how much was it, Jim? They promised, they didn't promise. They made a big deal about putting a lot of money into research at UW-Madison.
They promised UW-Madison, I think it was $100 million.
Yeah, and I don't want to say promise, because it turned out it wasn't a binding contract. It was more like, we might do this contract, but they haven't. They've put a couple $100,000 into research on it.
But again, in the context of especially the Walker re-election campaign, there were lots of Foxconn events taking place with Governor Walker or his proxies outstate in Eau Claire, because the incentives for the Foxconn project were deeply partisan. The Democrats were skeptical about it, and the Republicans were all in on it, because it was job creation, high tech, and they were taking their cues from Trump, but also watching Walker campaign on this and campaign on this huge success as he portrayed it. Today, where we stand, the Evers administration and Foxconn have gone back to the drawing board, and they've reached a new agreement. And the new agreement, the numbers, you just have to think about this for a minute. It was to be $3 billion and 13,000 jobs. We don't know what their investment, the new promise of the investment is, but we know what their new job target is. And it's a target. They say now it's going to be 1,500 jobs. That's a small scale manufacturer at best. That is it's a tenth of what they said they were going to do, just in terms of the sheer employment. And but then it also appears that they're not going to be making much of their own products, if any. It sounds as though, and what it sounds like they're going to be doing, and the story by Ricardo Torres points it out, is it looks like they're going to be a contract manufacturer. In other words, a company that assembles things for other companies. And in that case, they're not going to be doing anything on their own. They're going to be basically hired to, basically they're going to be a landlord.
So if I could just jump in there, Jim, there are kind of three main points that I've discovered about Foxconn, and that's one of them, that they can't decide on their own to make anything. They need to get someone else to say, we want that made. So, you've said a couple times high tech. Maybe their customers are high tech, and there's certainly a high tech component to their assembly, but they can't decide themselves to make anything. So that's point number one. Point number two is their expertise is high volume, low mix. So they don't customize, they make a lot of something. They make a lot of the same thing. So, and the third thing about them is they have very low margins. Their margins are about 3%. So, whereas take like Intel, their margins are probably 35%. So a tech company would typically, that makes its own stuff or contracts it out, would have very high margins. Foxconn doesn't. So what we brought into the state was not a primary high-tech company. What we brought into the state was this company that relies on other companies to make stuff, does high volume, not much variation, and has 3% margins. And that's like the reality of the myth that, they came with a myth of being a tech company. And the reality is they're a contract manufacturer. So.
And what the Evers administration accomplished was getting them to getting them to sort of give up the ghost and say, we're not going to be making these big panels or little panels or employing 13,000 people.
And one of the ways WDC did that is when Foxconn started doing these reports and saying, we have 500 employees, WDC said, we're not going to give you credit for those 500 employees because they're not making those big screens. And the contract says they were going to make the big screens. So that was where it was smart of the state, I think. That was where the negotiations started, that your employees aren't doing what you said they were going to do. And what was happening is the state was giving double incentives to Foxconn with the idea that it would build out this park and it would bring in, a glass company and all these other places. And so it was worth double incentives. As it played out, Foxconn didn't bring anybody into that park. And so the state kind of ratcheted them down to normal incentives. They're getting the same package any other manufacturer would get. So the state problem, I would say, is solved. The WDC solved the problem, but there's a bigger problem that, are you okay if I go there, Jim? There's a bigger
I was just going to, let me set you up. Let me set you up for one second. Anybody who's driven to Chicago, even if you look in the distance when you go by Mount Pleasant, you can see the dome. And we all remember what it was like driving on 94 South for the last several years. It was construction mania. It was road construction city. There were many very, very serious crashes. And what they were building was they were taking the 6-lane highway and making it into an 8-lane highway from that stretch from roughly the Milwaukee County line to just south of Foxconn. They did that for Foxconn. They did that because Foxconn said, we think we are going to have automated vehicles, automated trucks, and we need a dedicated lane of the freeway, blah, 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 to get them back and forth from the airport or from train hubs and so forth. So that's why we rebuilt I-94, was for Foxconn. But it goes even more. If you drive around that area, you find a Wisconsin Wisconsin Energy substation, and all this other infrastructure, roads, sewers, and so forth, millions and millions of dollars. And Kathleen, this is the intro. There's all this stuff, never mind the tax incentives, there's all this stuff that's already been bought. And why is that a problem, Kathleen?
So the state problem has been fixed. The state, right-sized the incentives, and the state's good. And everyone went, hallelujah, problem solved. The real problem is with the locals. Racine County and the village of Mount Pleasant, they have a contract with Foxconn that hasn't been renegotiated. And that contract still promises the 13,000 jobs and the $10 billion investment. And that contract is what's driving Foxconn's property tax payments. Foxconn is now the biggest property tax payer down there, but this is nothing compared to, there's a ramp up with that property tax. What they're paying now is nothing compared to, starting in January 2023, Foxconn has committed to pay $30 million a year of property taxes. And that's the reason that commitment is, they have agreed, whether it's developed or not, that Foxconn has agreed to have a valuation on that park of $1.5 billion. It's nowhere near 1.5 billion right now because you saw on the drone footage what's there. So the idea is that Foxconn, despite the fact that they're making nothing there right now, they've got a couple of demo assembly lines. Who thinks Foxconn is going to start paying 30 million of taxes in January 2023? But the problem for the locals is that if Foxconn doesn't make those payments, they've floated about 300 million of bonds for all this infrastructure that Jim's talking about to build it all out. If Foxconn doesn't start making those payments, Racine County and Mount Pleasant go bankrupt. You know, they're not going to have the money to pay the interest on those bonds. And so one of the points I've been making in these columns is, if we don't take hold of this ourselves, if we don't figure out how to build out that park to a point where there's property tax revenue to pay those bonds, they're going to go bankrupt. And what's going to happen is what always happens. You know, there will be a lot of hue and cry, wringing of hands, and eventually the New York bankers will come in. They'll sell it all off for 40 cents on the dollar. They'll figure out what to put in that park, and it'll all get righted. But by doing that, we're going to pay the New York people to do it. And so I guess one of my big questions is, why can't we do that ourselves now? Why are we congratulating ourselves that we've right-sized these state tax credits and ignoring this problem, this real financial problem that's brewing down there? And I'll say one more, Jim, I have one more thing. But so there was a lawsuit. This guy down there, this real estate developer, filed a lawsuit and a class action suit kind of around all this. And the class action suit accused Foxconn of breach of contract, which it's in breach of this contract right now because it's not building these big screens and it hasn't, you know, done these jobs. And the contract or the lawsuit hinted, you couldn't find it in the lawsuit, but there was a hint that there was a fraud claim, that, you know, Foxconn never intended to build those big screens. And as Jim said, you know, you can see that there was never a plan for a glass factory. That my understanding is that big building they have down there doesn't have kind of the subfloors that you would expect for those big screens. There's a lot of little details that could point to them not ever intending to build that big screen factory. But it didn't accuse Foxconn of fraud, but you could see that there was a setup for that. The guy's name is Hintz, the real estate developer. So suddenly that lawsuit went away. And, you know, I think the Journal Sentinel reporters on it, I talked with them about it. They thought it was going to go away. They weren't certain that the guy had status and all that stuff. But there's a story I heard that I can't substantiate, but I did hear this story. I heard that Foxconn went to the village manager in Mount Pleasant and said, we're not going to negotiate with a gun to our head, make that lawsuit go away. And I heard that I've heard this from several sources, that the village manager went to Hintz and said, if you don't drop that lawsuit, you're never going to develop another piece of property again in the county. So who knows, but there are people down there who believe that that Foxconn is stalling, that Foxconn is trying to get past the statute of limitations to avoid all of this stuff I've been talking about and get out of it that way, as it were.
One of the things that's come up in reporting from our news organization, but also others, and you know, what's interesting about Foxconn is some of the coverage is coming from the Asian press, which covers Foxconn in a whole different in a whole different way, and is skeptical of some of the coverage has been skeptical of what the company has done in other markets, other countries, other parts of our country, and they've come in and they've promised stuff and then just not delivered. And you know, the list of, in fact, we're working on a story right now, not to tip our hand entirely, but it's not a completely novel story, but we're stringing together the list of promises and deadlines that they've made and set and just haven't done anything by their deadline. The most recent is July 1st. They said this spring, on July 1st, we will tell you what we're going to be doing there. And July 1st has come and gone, and it's been complete crickets. And that's something that I think
I'd like to jump in there too,
Yeah.
Jim. And I want to say there's a question.
Yeah,
There's a question in the chat about the statute of limitations, and it's fuzzy. And when I talk to people about it, I get different views of it, because one of the questions is when that statute of limitations would start. Would it start when the contract started? Would it start when the construction, whatever? But my understanding, I can't verify this. My understanding is it's 6 years. So, but 6 years from what is kind of the question. And then there are a lot of questions around it. Would the municipalities really ever go after them for fraud? Would it be worth it? What kind of judgment could they get? I mean, there's a couple things. Terry Gao, the head of Foxconn, who left now, there's a suggestion he has a personal guarantee on a lot of this, and a lot of people think that wouldn't hold up. There's also the state has guaranteed 40% of it, so that 300 million of bonding, if it fell apart, the state would be 40% liable. So it does affect taxpayers across the state. So there are a lot of issues like that. I wanted to say, one of the things you saw before that July 1st deadline, there's an electric car company called Fisker, and Foxconn started kind of hinting that, well, they said that they were in negotiations with Fisker, and that they, might be making a car for Fisker, and that car might be made in Wisconsin. There were a lot of mights there, but having looked into that, Fisker's a guy, his name's Henrik Fisker. He's Scandinavian, and he's a car designer. He was in a big battle with Tesla, and he lost. They both got a lot of government money. He ended up having to shut down because of some questions about the way he used the government money. So he lost the battle with Tesla, kind of went away, and now he's resurfacing. And his idea is that he'll have a car company, he'll design a car, and he'll outsource all the manufacturing. He's signed a contract with Magna, the big Canadian manufacturing conglomerate, to make Fisker's first car in Europe, which theoretically is going to start soon. And then what he's talking about here would be the company's second car that would be made maybe here, and they have like 4 other locations in North America that they're looking at. So the best Foxconn has come up with is kind of this tenuous, maybe Fisker question about what they would make there. But it just feels like they're stringing it out to me. They just keep coming up with these things that might happen that have a lot more ifs when you look into them.
Kathleen, can I jump in a minute? Oh, are you going to be able to say a little bit about Five Lakes Institute?
Sure, if you'd like me to.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Should we pause Foxconn, or should we come back to that later?
I would prefer that you just do the Five Lakes, and I think we've heard enough.
Let me jump into that. So the way we're dealing with the desire I mentioned of my chairman to kind of look at this whole Great Lakes thing and Midwest. What we've done is we've tightly partnered with an organization called MRUN, Midwest Research University Network. It's in Chicago. It's run by a guy who used to be at Polsky Center at University of Chicago. And it represents all of the Midwest and Great Lakes region, many of them universities. And so what we've kind of realized is, all of these, we have a richness of universities in the region, and they're all in their own orbit. And our goal is to bring them together and to leverage what they all have together. So we have 3 programs that we run that I think will describe to you what we do. One is called Scout Camp. We have 5 verticals we operate in. They're the verticals that we think the region has the most assets in. They're human health, computing, energy, ag tech, and industrial tech. We're in our human health cycle right now, and We run 3 programs. One is Scout Camp, where we bring in the 12 or 13 biggest research universities in the region. Right now we do Great Lakes too. So we have everyone, we have University of Toronto, we have Mayo Clinic, we have Cleveland Clinic, Case Western, Northwestern, Wisconsin, Minnesota, et cetera. You get the picture. And then we bring in 13 venture capital firms, corporate and institutional, and we set up one-on-one meetings between them. And then we have some networking. So our idea is we're trying to get these universities better connected with venture capitalists in the region and on the coast, and then trying to get those groups to syndicate more. Then we have a program called 5 Lakes Forum, and at that we get 6 corporations in the vertical to do chats with us about the trends they see playing out over the next decade, and how this region can act on those trends. And then each corporation runs a roundtable with some of the universities in attendance. And then our third one is called, I love this name, Big Fish to Fry. And that one is kind of our catch-all. We'll do a chat with a leading person in that vertical, or a couple of them. And then we have networking, and we highlight some of the support assets in the region, like accelerators and incubators and stuff. So you can see what we're trying to do is tie the region together. And one interesting point about it, when we were planning, when we started doing that Scout Camp, we were planning on doing it in person in Chicago. We had a place where we were going to do it. And then COVID hit and we had to do it virtually. And we're never going back. Virtual for this region is so powerful because, they're not going to come to all these programs in person all the time, but we can get them all to come virtually. We can get people from the coast to come. So for example, we did industrial tech last, and we had this guy who's a fellow at George Washington University who wrote a book about Amazon. We had him come and talk about how Amazon is competing in the industrial space. And it was interesting. He said he thinks his book will be the last book written about Amazon as a whole, because Amazon is moving into so many segments. He thinks going forward, there will have to be individual books about what it's doing in each segment. So that's, we're trying to do what you guys are trying to do on a regional scale.
Kathleen, can you talk a little bit about how people on your in your world, in the 5 Lakes world, and in the economic planning and thinking ahead, what should happen at Foxconn, and what can we learn about how we got to where we are now? What are a couple of things that we've learned, pluses or minuses, and what should go on there? What do you think?
Sorry, I was distracted by a question in the chat, and we'll get to those next, right, Jim? Look at them. But so the issue, I think, is that the economic development people, they need to be more connected with the business people. And here, let me give you an example. Who in Wisconsin understands technology? I mean, technology drives economic development, right? So who in Wisconsin understands technology? Generac, like the executives at Generac understand technology. They understand where the world's going. Rockwell, my chairman who ran this private equity firm, my observation about Wisconsin and a lot of the Midwest is that the people who understand technology, and that's where economic development springs from, aren't the people involved in the conversation. The people in the I'll just give you an example. I've had this back and forth with Tim Sheehy at MMAC about Foxconn, and the point he made to me at one point is, I'm bringing all these CEOs down there to that manufacturing building, and they're impressed with what they're seeing. And my counterpoint is, if they're impressed, you're not bringing the right CEOs down there, because what they're looking at is demo lines. They're not looking at a full manufacturing effort or even technology, you know? So this is maybe kind of fuzzy, but we have to figure out who the right people are to have this conversation. And, you know, one thing that's going on in the state is, you know, University of Wisconsin-Madison just formed a new computer science effort. It's called the School of Computing, Data, and Information Sciences. And they just announced Friday that they raised, what was it, Jim, like 175 million
Right.
for a new building. You know, those people understand technology. The guy running it, kind of in a departure from typical academic practice, he's only got an undergraduate degree, but he's from Mondovi, Wisconsin. His name's Tom Erickson. He's the founding director of, they call it CDIS. He left after he got his degree in Wisconsin, and, you know, went around the world, worked in a lot of places, and ended up, was involved in a lot of startups in Boston, the last of which is called Akia. It's an open source software platform, and it was bought, a private equity firm took a majority stake for $1 billion, very successful company. That guy understands technology. So he's somebody we should be listening to all the time. You know, I mean, nothing against the CEOs of many of our Milwaukee companies, but how many of them understand technology and what it takes? If we had been talking to the people who understood technology, we would have understood those 3 points I made about Foxconn, that they're high volume, low mix, that they need customers to make anything, and that they have 3% margins. And when you have 3% margins, you're not a primary technology company. And that's, growth comes from, so one of the arguments I've made in my columns is that we should, there's a big, it used to be called Endless Frontiers, a big piece of legislation in Washington, DC. Now it's called like US Competitiveness and Innovation Act. But there's a part of that where they would put a lot of money. There's a, you know, we all know there's a problem in the car industry because of this lack of computer chips. So there are incentives in that for chip makers to build domestic chip making plants. And one of the arguments I've made is that would be transformational. I mean, look at Arizona, look how Arizona has transformed its economy because they've lured all these chip makers. Why don't we go after one of these chip makers? Like, we have to figure out what kind of technology. A really interesting thing in Wisconsin is we are 8th for manufacturing activity of all states. We're 30 something for manufacturing wages. We're a low tech manufacturing state. And we've got all these people driving our narrative about how we're all about manufacturing, but it's low tech manufacturing. If that's what we want to be, fine. But if we want economic development and growth, we have to figure out how to move to high tech.
Let's look, Kathleen, let's look at a couple of the questions we have here in the chat. Some of it's commentary, obviously. Why would anyone consider doing business at all with Foxconn at this point? The record is everything, blah, blah, blah.
I think in Wisconsin, a lot of people have figured out they don't want to, because one of the things Foxconn did is they had a portal where you could come and, you know, apply to be one of their suppliers. And a lot of people did that. And I've directly talked to someone who did it, who went and applied and, you know, got through the first hurdle. And then Foxconn said, now you have to pay us $10,000 to get through the second hurdle to try and be one of our suppliers. And so I think businesses in Wisconsin have, for the most part, figured it out because they went through the portal and they got told they had to pay to get further in the portal. So the people who are clinging to the Foxconn narrative, from my estimation, it's political. And, you know, one of the things that's going on down in Racine County and Mount Pleasant, the Racine County executive and the Mount Pleasant village manager are both conservative, and they won't talk to me. You know, they're mad at me for these columns I've been writing, but my sense is from talking to other people that their conservative politics are paralyzing them from addressing this situation we talked about.
And is that, Kathleen, do you think that that's because they've doubled down and are, you know, the one person who's sort of left and is still around on the political side, who's their big champion, is Speaker Robin Vos, Assembly Speaker Robin Vos. And is it that they're sort of still hewing the line that this is a transformational type project? Or
they won't talk to me directly,
Yeah.
and so I don't know, but I do talk to a lot of people down in that area, and my sense is that they believe it will work out. I don't know what they believe. What they say to the public is that they believe Foxconn will come through and they believe it will work out. Voss, I mean, I haven't talked to him, but what I've heard is that he's worried because, a lot of Republicans think Walker lost the election because of what has happened with Foxconn. And, I guess Voss, had more, someone took a run at him last election and came closer than anyone thought. So, they're worried. I don't know, though. I can't understand. I will say MMAC and M7, particularly Jim Page at M7, seems to be, very tight with them. And so, there's some, I don't know, Jim Tim Sheehy at MMAC has not come out and said a lot of the things you and I are saying about Foxconn. He's been, I guess I would say, maybe neutral at this point. So I don't, asking Tim Sheehy would be an interesting question. Like, what should these locals do given the soup they're in, right?
Well, the question from Mark is interesting. If Foxconn was never going to do what they said, why did they do what they did? And bad planning, bad management, politics, Trump, Walker. That point has been addressed not so much by our reporting, because let's face it, Foxconn doesn't talk to us other than the grand announcements. We have not, and it's not for lack of trying, we haven't talked to them. They have a local, a Wisconsin-based public relations firm that's tied to, it's run by a former Walker aide and a former aide to Senator Johnson. So, and those guys are actually frustrated as well because they're not able to communicate with the company, and so if we ask questions, it takes forever for us to get answers. Other reporting elsewhere has, with some speculation, I think, the thinking was maybe the founder of Foxconn, Terry Goh, was trying to accomplish a trade deal, or that was more of an international play between him and the Trump administration, and that he was trying to help Trump in the Midwest. And
I've heard another theory, Jim. Another theory I've heard is that at the time, there was a lot of talk about putting tariffs on products that were coming from China, and Apple would have suffered considerably. And Apple is half of Foxconn's business. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but what I've heard is that Apple was supporting this because Apple didn't want tariffs put on the iPhones.
And, but the question is, why would they displace hundreds of homeowners, go through this whole elaborate 4 square mile, adding lanes to the freeway, a power plant, all this stuff for nothing? It's just, it's one of the great mysteries of this whole thing, is why would they do this? And it's not that the market changed or whatever. The market didn't change. They changed, and they changed what they were telling us.
There's a question about whether the Wisconsin Technology, and I see a hand up too, I'll do this, then the hand up, whether the Wisconsin Technology Council is a player in transforming Wisconsin. I want to say broadly there are a lot of organizations like the Wisconsin Technology Council, the MMAC, the GMC, you can go, the WMC. There are a lot of organizations in Wisconsin and in the Midwest, as we've seen, as we've worked in the Midwest and Great Lakes region, where they're hamstrung by their funding sources. I'm lucky enough to have a guy with a lot of money who has a vision for what this region could be. What they have, most of them have big boards so that the executive director can do whatever they want. Most of the executive directors, you can go look at their 990s, are making, in my opinion, too much money. So they're there to protect that their own income stream. And they can't, I've seen many examples where we're trying to get something done in the state and we ask some of these organizations to work with us, and they've already cut a deal with whoever we're fighting to not fight, to stay neutral. So, again, like the Wisconsin Technology Council, look at their board. It's like 50 people, and you've got a guy like me who used to be, a journalist who, unlike me, has a photographic memory and, has a lot of good programs set up. But who are the tech people he's talking to? Who are the people? And there aren't that many in the state. There aren't that many in the region. And they're the people who can help you figure out how to drive this stuff. So the narrative's wrong. And all of these supporting organizations are supporting things other than what you really want to accomplish. So,
also, I'll point out too that the MMAC and especially WMC, there's a lot of rancor among their members about the political activity that those organizations have engaged in, especially, and you're going to see it next year in the Senate campaign and the gubernatorial campaign. Those organizations are engaging in considerable amounts of very aggressive political advertising. Almost all of it attack ads against Democrats, and that has helped. That in some regards that's hurt their cause, because when they try to take a leadership role on something like Foxconn, for instance, it's automatically viewed as partisan.
That said, I want to give a shout out to one Republican. Mike Gallagher, our Wisconsin no relation, was one of 4 original co-sponsors on the Endless Frontiers Act. He's from the Green Bay area. He has support of a lot of the tech people up in Green Bay. And, I do think he's one political voice who understands this economic development / technology stuff. There's a hand up.
Yeah, Dennis Merritt has a question.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank both of you for presenting on this. I thought it was just me that was so totally befuddled by this whole project from the very beginning. So it's really nice to see that 2 reporters can't make too much sense of it either. To me, it's just been part of the whole insanity of Trump and Walker type people from the beginning. But my question is, and I think, Jim, you said you were working on this, but you said there were Asian, I guess, correspondents that have written about Foxconn and other parts of the world. And this seems to be some kind of a pattern. So is there something that you can discern about their behavior? Is this just some kind of megalomania on the part of the owner or something? Because what's happening here in Wisconsin has made no sense, as you 2 of you have reinforced that idea.
I think what's happened elsewhere, and there was mention of it made in Pennsylvania, and I think there was an instance down in, I feel like it was in Georgia, but to my knowledge, it's never been like this. It's never been.
They never got this far.
They've never they've come in and they said, we're gonna do this. We're gonna look at doing this. They haven't gone this far and bought up and flattened with the help of state, local, and municipal government. They haven't created such a huge bunch of nothing. And they have invested and the state and locals have invested millions and well, billions of dollars in this project. So this sort of takes it to another level.
I think the ultimate total is like 1.5 billion, including all the road work and what the state put in and everything.
And so that's there. And the big question is, now what? And now what? Is it an industrial park? Does it get turned into a subdivision?
But the problem is, because of the way the bonding is structured, if what's been happening a lot in that corridor is warehousing and distribution. And if you put warehousing and distribution in that park, you're not going to get the property tax revenue that you need to pay the bonds. That's the problem they have. I don't know what you do about it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you could get a chip making factory in there. There's another, someone has suggested there's this new type of hydrogen plant that, green hydrogen, I think it's called. That should be the discussion. What can you put in that park? I mean, it's got a lot of advantages. It's an hour from O'Hare. It's cleared. It's ready to go. It's got the, hookups for everything. Let's dream. What could we put there that would be big? Who's doing the dreaming?
I think that's that optimism of it's shovel ready or turnkey ready or whatever. I think that's that's where Tim Sheehy and others like him in the business community are coming from. That maybe it will pay off at some point. It's got to, because it is there and the location.
But will it pay off because we go out and we find something to put there, some high margin tech business, or will it pay off because the New York bankers, sell it at 40 cents on the dollar and get a lot of fees and figure it out for us? Who's going to figure it out?
Bruce asked also, how does sustainability and climate change play out with any of these actors? I take a crack at that. The one thing I was
never heard anything about that.
Yeah, the one thing I was just going to point out is on the whole electric car front. Foxconn teaming up with, Lord knows if Fisker is actually going to build anything.
Make their second car in North America and here, if they make their first car.
Yeah. But the one thing that's that is interesting, and as a business journalist, I've really taken note of this, is the whole transformation of the auto industry with this with the climate change concerns baked into it. You saw this at the at the European Auto Show in the last month. All these manufacturers are doubling down on electric and on battery and so forth. And the big ones, Ford, GM, and all the German automakers. But there's also this whole raft of startups, never mind Tesla, that's obviously not a startup.
Like Rivian in Illinois.
There's a whole slew of them are rattling around out there that are just starting to get going, and we'll see. We'll see, and is Kenosha County or Racine County going to, not that long ago, we can all remember AMC employed thousands of people down there in Kenosha, and
people have suggested that might be a reasonable place for an electric car manufacturing plant. Well, that AMC plant has been torn down, and that, I think that horse is out of the barn. You look around the Midwest and you can see where there's Lordstown in Ohio, which actually has a letter of going concern right now, and I think Rivian is one of the more successful ones. I think Amazon and Ford have invested in it, but I guess that's my point. You got to be in this game. You know, the people in Illinois were in the game. They were working at this Rivian thing, and they've been working at it for a long time. So what you have to do is you have to say, what's coming over the next 10 years and how can we play into it? That's how you get this stuff. You don't get it by having Trump say, you know, maybe you should have Foxconn come and visit you, and having, you know, MMAC tout it. And that's not how you win.
Are there other questions? Otherwise, I had one for Kathleen. What's the, as with 5 Lakes, you're trying to take a Midwestern regional approach to transforming the economy. What is the biggest obstacles to accomplishing that? What do you run into time and again?
So the reason, you know, you think about all these innovation centers around the country, Boston and, you know, Silicon Valley and Austin not as much, but they've got density, you know, and we don't. It takes 5 Midwestern states approximately to equal the population of California. So, you know, our thought is what you need to do is you need to connect this region better. I saw a graphic the other day that showed all the connections that I think it was Boston had to, like, VCs and the global discussion about technology, and it was thick with lines. And then how many Chicago had, and it was thin. There weren't a lot of lines, and that's our biggest city in the region. So what you've got to do is you've got to figure out who the people are who can, if you could get rid of a bunch of state boundaries, that would be awesome, right? I mean, on this panel I was on this week, you know, there's a question of, you know, how can we, there's this, the federal government, you know, if this legislation passes, is going to dole out $1 billion to each of probably 10 markets. Madison's in the running. Madison's been working at this. Do we support Madison? No. We complain about UWM not getting as many resources. We should be supporting Madison getting the $1 billion with the recognition that if they get it, you can't deploy $1 billion in Madison. You've got to spread it around probably 3 states. You've got to have all those connections going. So we just need to think about, you know, what do we have going on in our industries, and what can we put together? You know, Chicago has logistics. They've got, you know, Coyote Logistics and a bunch of startups, a couple of them unicorns. Well, C.H. Robinson is up in Minnesota, and they're probably one of the biggest logistics providers. You want to fight Uber, you have to, like, be talking to each other. There's another hand up.
Is Dennis, you got your hand up again?
Yes, a couple things. One was Tommy Thompson had really stressed railroads here in the Midwest as a way of connecting all these cities. And then Phil Lewis, who had worked with Governor Nelson, talked about the Circle City concept and connecting all the cities. But the other thing, picking up on what Mark had said before, it seems like one of the selling points for the Midwest is that, at least initially, we're going to be in one of the best positions in America in terms of climate change. I mean, look at all the fires, and who would want to build a home in the mountains in anywhere out west right now with those fires, and then the floods and the hurricanes in other parts of the country. So in terms of the long-term thing, and then the other element is in terms of the future, the China's Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, in terms of where technology is probably going to be going, the Chinese have given this a lot of thought. And what kind of systems do they have there for really bringing technology and manufacturing together? It seems like they've really worked something out. So that's kind of a bundle.
I have 2 things to say. That one is, yeah, maybe we're well positioned for climate change. Arizona is probably one of the worst positioned states, but Arizona is attracting all the chip making. So you can't just sit here and say we're well positioned for climate change. You have to say, what kind of plan do we have for attracting what kind of technology in the future, and what kind of resources are we putting around it, from monetary to educational, et cetera? And we don't do that. We don't think of it that way. We want to dabble in everything. You know, we can be this, we can be that. And look, now we have another startup and it's in a different, well, you don't win that way. You can't play big that way. You have to focus and decide what your going to go after. In terms of the, what was the other thing you said?
China's Belt and Road.
Oh, yeah. The thing about that is what China does is they say, we're going to put a city here, and the city is going to have this focus. You know, that city is going to be the city that focuses on artificial intelligence, and all the artificial intelligence people go there, and they have a stunning focus area on artificial intelligence. I don't think we can do that here. You know, so maybe this virtual stuff is a boon to us, because maybe we can do it virtually. I mean, we run all our programming virtually now, and it works very well. We've figured out how to network and do the breakout rooms and all that, but you've got to figure out what your focus is, and then you've got to drill down on it. And you can't do it like China does, and no one's going to listen if government tries to order everybody around.
My other thing was about Tommy Thompson and the railroads.
So, you know, the railroad thing, I am such a big fan of railroads, but, you know, Mayor Barrett decided to do a trolley car, and Scott Walker, and if only we could have switched those two for that decision, right? And you know, had Barrett deciding to do the fast train between Milwaukee and Madison, and Walker nixing the trolley car, which, has anyone ridden the trolley car? But, you know, again, it's that state thing. You know, Indiana used to have a lot of trains from Chicago, and then they cut the funding, and now they've got the, you know, the train that runs to DC, and it's weird times. So how do you get all the states to work together? You can't do it. Wisconsin can't do it alone. You have to have all the states working together. They've been increasing the number of Amtraks between Milwaukee and Chicago. They want to do, I think it's 2 more, and they can't because the city of Glenview allocated, you know, $5,000 to lobbying efforts because it doesn't want those trains idling at the Glenview station. So, you know, how do you, I mean, part of our problem is we enjoy all the legacy infrastructure and services that we have, but those are often what stop us from doing what Arizona can do.
Okay, I think this is a good time to probably wrap things up. Is there one last question, or if not, we'd like to thank the speakers. Yeah, we need, this discussion looks like we could come back in a year from now and see if things have gotten any better.
I'll just say thank you for having us. And you know, Kathleen's been returned to the Journal Sentinel a year ago this month. I owe you lunch.
I know, I was going to remind you of that.
Yeah, but
can I tell the funny story of how I landed with you guys? When I left, I wanted to do a column, and the business editor at the time didn't see it the same way I did. So I went and started doing a column for the Biz Times. And I did a column about Briggs last summer, and Nelson texted me and said, the editor wants to know why you didn't do that for us. And I said, well, because you didn't want it. He said, let's have coffee.
But that was the one final thing I just wanted to say is we can't do this kind of coverage, and never mind our business coverage, Foxconn, the economy and all that, but all the other stuff that we cover without support from engaged individuals like you guys. And please subscribe to the paper, and please support legit journalism. And
send Jim story ideas.
And send me story ideas. jnelson@journalsentinel.com. I listen.
Yes, I second that. Okay. For some reason, we seem to be frozen here. So I guess this will be a good time to stop.
Thanks for the third, Bruce.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, you guys.
Okay, thanks.